It's been a pretty quiet offseason so far for the Atlanta Braves and really a lot of Major League Baseball. Could that be getting ready to change as the winter meetings begin this weekend? We're going to preview that winter meetings as Grant McAuley joins the show. And we're going to be talking about the Atlanta Braves. What's the holdup with Dansby Swanson? What's going to happen with Marcell Ozuna? We'll cover all of that and give some of our predictions for the winter meetings. All of that on today's episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. Make sure you download the Locked On Sports Atlanta app on Roku and Amazon Fire devices. I am your host, Jake Mastroianni. You can follow me on Twitter at shortstopball. Also, make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. Send in any questions, comments, or feedback you have for the podcast. If you're new, subscribe to us on YouTube. And if you're watching this video on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button and that notification bell. And as always, thanks for those giving us a listen, making us your first listen of each and every day, continuing to post episodes daily throughout the offseason. Hopefully, we're going to have a lot more to talk about here with the winter meetings picking up. And joining me for that winter meetings conversation today is Grant McAuley. Grant, thanks so much for joining the show.
Yeah, hey, it feels like what's old is new again. We haven't been able to sit down and talk Braves for a while, so thanks for having me.
We haven't, and honestly, Grant, I mean, not much has changed since our last conversation, especially when we wrapped up the end of the season. I mean, here we are getting into December, and really for not just the Braves, but the entire league, we haven't seen a ton of movement yet.
No, we really haven't. It's just been those little deals that we keep seeing. I mean, you got Zach Eflin signing with the Rays reportedly today. Tyler Anderson, those are a couple that spring to mind. I mean, Edwin Diaz signing a huge deal to stay with the Mets might be the biggest signing of the offseason so far, unless something's escaping me. But yeah, we haven't seen those big shortstops start signing. We haven't seen any monster, just blockbuster crazy trades. Shohei Ohtani's still an Angel, so I guess that's a thing. Aaron Judge hasn't signed anywhere. There's a lot still to happen over the course of this offseason. I guess as we come out of the Thanksgiving type of or the Thanksgiving time of year, I'm just thankful we're not staring at another lockout, because that was not fun last winter.
It was not. Yeah, as cold as things have been right now, it's nothing compared to what we had to deal with last December and January and February going into last season. So I'm certainly glad we haven't had that. But what do you think? What is the holdup? Do you think there's any one particular thing right now, or is it, teams just trying to fill everything out? It's a pretty big market. You look at Judge, Verlander, DeGrom, along with the big four shortstops, a lot of big names out there. Is there anything in particular you can think of that's holding up the market right now?
Really in my experience, and I wish I was going to the winter meetings this year. They haven't been live since 2019, the last time they were in San Diego, and I was out there. And I feel like even if the biggest moves of the winter don't happen there, when you have the whole baseball world converging on one city, it seems like some very important talks begin to happen. So maybe there's a couple of big signings or big moves or trades or something that go there. Then everything seems to just start coming together in the close of December and early January. But there are a lot of the big free agents that are all kind of controlled, their market is anyway, by Scott Boras. And I think that's kind of a big story to look at, because he's going to be trying to get top dollar for all of his guys. I mean, he can get creative if you want to with some of these, one giant year with a couple other years, but you can opt out after the first year. I don't expect to see a ton of that this year. I don't expect to see Carlos Correa do it again. But yeah, I think really more than anything, we're just waiting for one or two of these big free agents to sign and start to get the wheels going. And the winter meetings, a lot of times, can be a place where at least you start to take that next big step towards something happening.
Yeah, and we've seen Alex Anthopoulos be pretty aggressive early on in offseason so far, sometimes even locking players up in November. Now, he did say himself that he got a lot of his legwork done during the season, doing those extensions, bringing Charlie Morton back. So, honestly, a lot of his work is done. There's the big hole at shortstop and potentially in left field as well. And you talked about, one domino leading to the rest of them following. I feel like that's where we are with Dansby Swanson at the moment. I feel like he's probably at the bottom of those top four guys. And I think it's partly, him waiting to see how his market opens up, because everybody that's in line for a shortstop, they're probably going to start at the top of the list. So you figure or at least I figure this, you can tell me if you agree, if Correa or Trey Turner signs, I think that would kind of, again, that domino effect lead to maybe when we see something happen with Dansby Swanson to see if his market picks up for the teams who miss out on those players.
Yeah, there certainly is. And there are going to be a handful of teams that are looking for shortstops. I mean, the Phillies spring to mind as one in the National League East that could be looking to upgrade at that position. And I think we've read some rumors about Trey Turner perhaps being at the top of their holiday wish list. And, I don't know who the first one's going to be or where exactly they're going to go. I mean, we could sit here and take our guesses all day, but I think as far as the top dollar guy, Correa's in line to get the most of these shortstops. And I do think even though it's a top tier with 4 really good shortstops, 4 all-stars, there's kind of tiers within the 4 of them and we haven't even brought up Xander Bogaerts yet. He's an interesting name. And, his choice to opt out with the Red Sox could lead him to a much bigger payday somewhere else. It doesn't really sound like the road is paved for him to come back to Boston. So, you got to have the Red Sox, a big spending club that's going to be out there in the market for a shortstop. The Twins threw a bunch of money at Correa last year. So could they be looking to take that money that they had earmarked for Correa and maybe throw it at a guy like Bogaerts? I don't know that, they're going to sign Correa or Turner in the American League Central. I don't necessarily expect that, but it's a really fascinating waiting game that, it's really easy to get impatient with it. But if you're a Braves fan, I think that the best fit all along has really been Dansby Swanson. If you're going to spend that kind of big money, though, get over the luxury tax and swing for the fences, so to speak, it would be pretty intriguing to see if any of those other 3 shortstops might fit the bill for the Braves, because they'd certainly make the team better and go exactly with the kind of club that Alex Anthopoulos has been building for years now.
Yeah, and obviously, I don't want to get into a payroll discussion. I know we've done that a lot, but the Braves are at the point, unless other money gets moved, and we can talk about that in a second, they're going to have to go into that luxury tax. If they're going to make any type of big move this offseason, they're going to have to go into that luxury tax. And if you're going to do that, do you go for a little bit more and maybe get a Bogaerts or a Turner? It sounds to me, Grant, that everything I've read, it's Dansby Swanson or nothing at shortstop, essentially, or give Grissom a shot. Now, maybe that's not correct, but that's just the perception I get from everything I'm reading coming out of, the Braves coaching staff and everything. But what are your feelings on that? Do you think it's Dansby or bust at shortstop? And I don't mean bust in terms they won't do anything, but either Dansby or go look for left field and let Grissom play at shortstop. I think there's one big move that the Braves make this offseason, whether it's in shortstop or left field. And I don't know what that's going to be, but either way, I think if they do that, they're going to have to really consider going into the luxury tax.
Yeah, they certainly will. And you just look at the payroll, you see if you want to be a top 5 team, which again, I've had discussions throughout the course of the year that said, hey, that's their next big goal. But it doesn't mean it's all going to happen overnight or in one offseason. But they were a top 10 payroll this past year. The Braves continue to build the highest payroll in franchise history pretty much year over year now. And with the Battery and Truist Park just packed out 81 plus times a year, then into October and everything that comes with that, they are going to be one of the top spending clubs in baseball. But again, when and who they're going to spend it on are important questions to ask, and we're going to try to determine when exactly that'll be. The sooner the better if you're trying to make yourself give yourself everything you need at shortstop, because I would just be surprised, to kind of circle back in on Vaughn Grissom, if he is the starting shortstop for the Braves on opening day. That's not to take anything away from the fact that this kid could be a really nice building block for the Braves in the future. I just feel like a lot of young players, he came in, he had some initial success, and then at least at the plate, things started to cool off quite a bit. And then you start to realize he was one of the 3 or 4 youngest players in baseball this year upon being promoted. So he skipped AAA altogether. Would that be the kind of finishing school that he might benefit from, especially being back over at shortstop rather than playing at second base? I think that's something to consider. I also don't expect Orlando Arcia to be the starting shortstop on opening day either. So if you're telling me Dansby Swanson or bust in the free agent market, maybe that is the case, but that would not rule out Alex Anthopoulos getting creative and maybe making some kind of trade that could upgrade that position. I just feel like the Braves are in too much of the higher end of the window of contention, having already won a World Series, having won the division 5 consecutive years, and with the core of this team locked in, to be taking any steps back at any positions or having too much uncertainty at any particular position just by choice. They're going to go out there and try to make themselves better, I believe.
Yeah, especially at the shortstop position. For me, it's such an important, position, especially with the shift going away.
Yep.
We don't know how that's going to affect it, but, you probably want a pretty good defender at shortstop, and Dansby just winning a Gold Glove is certainly that. All right, next I want to come back and talk about money a little bit, talk about Ozuna, who could be playing a factor into that money as well, and then some other key topics for the Braves, what could be happening at the winter meetings, and we'll talk about that next. But before we do, I want to tell you about BetOnline. This episode brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They have it all covered at BetOnline.net. And if you love podcasts, and I know you do because you're listening to this one, you can find those over at BetOnline as well. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix responsibly. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. So we talked a little bit about Dansby, and I want to get to him a little bit more in a second, but let's go to the other big talking point for the Braves this offseason, and that is Marcell Ozuna. And, I don't know that this is holding things up with the Braves or not, but I think that's certainly a big weight on Alex's shoulders right now, trying to figure out what to do with Marcell Ozuna. Is there an option to trade him? Are they going to have to cut him? I know Justin Toscana of AJC wrote an article yesterday, the Braves, putting it out there that they think he's going to have a bounce back season. I saw, your tweets on that. I don't know how much I buy into that, but at least it sounds like they're trying to posture it into the idea that he could come back. And look, you look at his Baseball Savant page. Yeah, he hits the ball hard. There's no denying that. If he could just do it more consistently, I think we'd have a pretty good player on our hands, at least, a solid DH. I don't ever want to see him in the field again, but I just want to get your thoughts now on Marcell Ozuna, what you think happens with him. Does he make it to opening day on this Braves roster? Are they able to trade him for anything, or to attach a prospect to him to save any type of money? You look at that Jake Odorizzi trade, Braves moved him and they only saved a couple of million in that. I mean, and there's that, we talked about this before. We did a postcast is, there was that rumor with the Nationals for Patrick Corbin, and they weren't even willing to do that. That just tells you how bad of a contract Ozuna is. But just your thoughts on the Ozuna situation, because I think it's just kind of a dark cloud right now hanging over Alex Anthopoulos and what to do with him.
Yeah, it certainly breeds uncertainty, and I don't think that he does anything to solve the left field dilemma. And if you look at going all the way back to the beginning of 2021, and I'm going to go ahead and put the caveat on it of putting his off-field problems aside, on the field, he has been one of the least productive everyday players over the last couple of seasons. I know he missed a big chunk of time last year because he had the dislocated fingers, and of course he got suspended. But when he came back this year, primarily playing pretty much every day until late into the year when he finally, found himself on the bench for the better part of, I believe, the month of August, and kind of rebounded in September. You just look inside these numbers, and while the Savant data does say that, he hits the ball hard, max velocities are great, the regular velocities are pretty great, but, the whiff rate is about as bad as it's ever been in his career. His walk rate completely cratered, especially from what it was a couple of years ago, and he doesn't do enough outside of hitting the occasional home run, to me, that makes me feel like this is somebody that I could count on to bounce back and return to form, because we're not talking about a couple of bad months or a bad half or, a bad slump. We're talking about two very troublesome years from an on-field production standpoint and the off-field aspects that go with it. But $37 million tied up in this guy, that's going to be tough to move. I remember going to winter meetings, I believe it was in 2015, and John Hart, and maybe it was 2014, was talking about the BJ Upton contract, feeling like he was walking around the lobby of the hotel with an anchor around his neck, just trying to figure out some way to get creative and move out of that. And we know that eventually, to dump that contract, the Braves traded Craig Kimbrell. That ended up working out okay because you got a draft pick you turned into Austin Riley, but the Braves are not in a rebuild right now. They're not looking to dump off other good assets, and I would hate to waste a premium prospect just to save a little bit of money, but I don't make the financial decisions for Liberty Media or Alex Anthopoulos. So he's going to have to get creative. And if Marcell Ozuna is, for whatever reason, still on the active roster, it won't be, I think, for lack of trying to explore other options and see about moving him. Because if you're willing to take on Patrick Corbin and a contract that's a pretty big albatross, and I don't think that that's using that term lightly, then you're trying to get as creative as you possibly can. And I don't know if there's a club out there that's really buying into the Marcell Ozuna bounce back candidate for nearly $40 million.
Yeah, and you hit on it too. For a farm system that already rates as one of the worst in baseball, you would really hate to part with a a Jared Schuster and a Freddie Tarnuk, or, two of your top pitching prospects, which is what I think you would have to attach to Ozuna, even to save 6, 8, maybe $10 million if you're lucky. Are you willing to do that? I don't know. Maybe some people are, maybe Alex Anthopoulos is, but I think that's what it would take. You'd have to give up 2 of your really good prospects in a farm system that's already not very deep in order to save some money on that Marcell Ozuna deal. Nobody's taking on that entire contract unless you're giving them Acuna or Michael Harris attached to them, and they're certainly not doing that. So again, nobody's taking on that contract. At best, I think you save 6 to 10 million, attach a couple of prospects to him. Brad Horn says, I'm not an Ozuna fan. However, for 16 million, play him at DH on a regular basis. Don't forget that he put up runner-up numbers to Freeman in 21. It's also, 2020, that was a shortened season where he was, MVP candidate. And as you said, Grant, hasn't been that good since then. Look, and I've been saying this, Grant, I think if you play him 140 games, I think he hits you 25 to 30 home runs, but he doesn't give you anything else. He's not a consistent hitter. He doesn't get on base. He can't run. He can't play in the field. He does one thing well, and he hits the ball really hard when he makes contact. He does nothing else well to help you win a ball game.
No, he doesn't. And like I said, if you're not walking, which he didn't last year, I think it was like a 6% walk rate, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have Fangraphs pulled up, but I looked at it earlier today, and he didn't surpass 60 runs batted in. I don't think he surpassed 60 runs scored this year, and he played at a ballpark 120, 125 games this year. So it wasn't like he wasn't in the lineup. I mean, he just went into long stretches of being an unproductive member of the Braves lineup. And after a kind of a hot start for the first couple of weeks of the season where you saw, hey, man, this guy's back. He's hitting the ball hard. That's great. The production really just didn't show up throughout the bulk of the season. Then after he kind of had another issue off the field, and it looked like, hey, were we wondering if he played his last game as a Brave? Well, here comes Marcell Ozuna with a couple or 3 decent weeks to maybe put a little bit of take a little bit of the bad taste out of your mouth at the end of the year, if that's what you're into. But personally, I don't think that was enough late of a sample size to make me believe that from a production standpoint in your lineup, and then also failing everything else, being able to be a positive member of that clubhouse, that this is a headache that is worth continuing to try to power your way through. But again, you're going to have to get creative. And I would hate to throw prospects after a bad contract to just save just a modicum of money, because if there's a club out there that thinks Marcell Ozuna is going to bounce back, why wouldn't you just wait for the Braves to go ahead and cut him a la Robinson Cano with the New York Mets? And then you can take your flyer on this guy if you believe he's got something left in the tank. And I know Ozuna's a little bit younger, but the productivity ain't that much better than what Robinson Cano was doing the last couple of years.
It is not. So let's move on a little bit, though, because looking forward to the winter meetings and the rest of the offseason as well. Obviously, we've touched on shortstop, left field. Those seem like the biggest holes for the Braves. What are kind of your thoughts now? I know we haven't spoken in several weeks now. What are kind of your thoughts for the Braves and what they do this offseason? Do you think they get shortstop? Do you think they get Dansby Swanson? Or there's some names in left field that intrigue you? I know there's been some reports of the Braves being interested in Mitch Haniger, but report from Buster Olney today said that he's talking about maybe getting $15 million a year. I think that's probably more than what the Braves were willing to do. I like Andrew Benintendi. I think he gives you a different type of bat in the lineup. Do you think they go after a starting pitcher? I know a lot of people in the chat and the comments on YouTube have been asking me all offseason about DeGrom. I keep just shooting that down because I can't see it happening, especially if they're not willing to go into the luxury tax. But what are kind of your thoughts with how the Braves put things together this offseason? Do you think they just continue to beef up the bullpen? Where do you think they go from here based on what we've seen, or what we haven't seen, rather, over the last month or so?
Yeah, and we haven't seen a lot. And one thing I do go back to around the trade deadline is that when you think about making your bullpen better, the Braves got Raisel Iglesias from the Angels. So it was kind of like the Charlie Morton deal where you got a couple of pieces done. Yeah, you signed some extensions with some other players, and they've made a couple of minor signings to add some depth to the bullpen, but you can always make the bullpen better. And I know that some folks, looked at, hey, would Kenley Jansen be interested in coming back? If he is for the right price, I'd be interested in putting him in my bullpen because I'll collect as many good relievers as I can. I know he had a couple of bad weeks here and there last year, but by and large, he got the job done, and he was just yet another weapon at the disposal of the Braves in the late innings. And those are always important. But I don't feel like they're out there trying to figure out how to throw money at another closer. You do have Iglesias. You could just go that route if you want to. And they've got some other very good relievers. But shortstop wise, I feel like if you can't get Dansby Swanson back, which I will still say until let me put that out there, unless or until he signs somewhere else, I still feel it's the best partnership for both sides, the club and the player, for Dansby to continue in Atlanta. I think he wants to be here, but I think he wants to be here at the rate that he feels is appropriate. And I think the Braves, just like we learned last year with Freddie Freeman, have a number in mind, and we'll see how close they can get and if it's a bridge too far or not. But if it doesn't happen, I would anticipate Alex Anthopoulos getting a shortstop from somewhere else to come in, making some kind of trade, whether that's a Willie Adames type with the Milwaukee Brewers. I know his name's been thrown out there a lot because Milwaukee could do some wheeling and dealing. Maybe the winter meetings kickstart some of those talks. We'll see if that plays out. But left field wise, I feel like they kind of need Eddie Rosario to bounce back as much or more than anything. And I believe in Eddie Rosario bouncing back to be a more productive player than I do Marcell Ozuna. So take that for what it's worth. But I was interested in maybe DH-wise finding somebody on one of those patented Alex Anthopoulos one-year deals, somebody like a J.D. Martinez that could come in and maybe give you some right-handed thump from DH. You're not going to play him in the field altogether that often, if at all. But if you got Rosario out there, you can find somebody maybe to platoon a little bit with him. Then again, if you want to get creative in DH and find a way to get William Contreras some more at-bats, I'd be on board for that. So the Braves are in a pretty good place. They, other than shortstop, they don't have these big glaring holes where they need to go out and sign 2 or 3 more players or make 2 major trades. They're a really well-constructed ball club, but when you've had success and when you've got as good a ball club as you do, you just want to see it get that much better. It's hard not to get a little bit greedy if you're a fan because, you want to see your club reach the highs they did in 2021, and the winter is the time in which you get the most excited about that, I think.
For sure. And we mentioned this at the top. And again, Alex said it himself. A lot of his work was done during the season. To your point, the Iglesias move, the Charlie Morton move. There aren't a lot of holes on this team. And I'm of the belief, Grant, you could go into the season right now with this roster and you can compete for a division title. And depending on how things play out, you could compete for a World Series when you're talking about, Acuna, Albies coming back, Riley, Olsen. I mean, Contreras, Darno. I mean, there's already Michael Harris. I mean, there's already a good lineup there. Fried, Strider, Wright, Morton, and possibly Ian Anderson, possibly Mike Soroka. I mean, the team is deep as constructed now. It's already a team ready to compete. We're talking about, putting the finishing touches on it this offseason.
Yeah, no, you really are. And I know I saw a question in here about Chris Bassett from my friend Doug Counts. And look, you could spend some money on a free agent starter, I guess, but I don't really see that being high on the list of, what the Braves would do. I mean, if they're going to put out the kind of money that would put you over the luxury tax, which I assume Bassett would get a pretty good amount of money wherever he signs. He had a pretty decent year for the Mets, and we've already seen the going rate for starting pitchers has been pretty robust thus far. And there's a lot of guys who haven't signed yet, but long story short, I feel like if you're going to make some kind of big move and go over the luxury tax, then wouldn't you rather be spending it on Jacob deGrom or Justin Verlander or some guy that makes you demonstratively better? Because if you backfill that 5th spot of the rotation behind Max Fried and Kyle Wright and Spencer Strider and Charlie Morton, you've got Mike Soroka, you've got Kyle Muller, you've got Bryce Elder. I mean, you've got some real candidates there, and Ian Anderson, hopefully, will have the opportunity to bounce back as well. While I will always tell you that you can never have too much starting pitching, which is a Brave saying this is old as time, I just don't know that that's going to be the high priority for spending free agent dollars this offseason.
Yeah, and I like this question here from Matthew Anderson. Does the current starting pitching market price-wise make the Charlie Morton extension at $20 million more palatable for y'all? Look, Mike Clevenger signed a 1-year, $12 million deal, a guy that wasn't very good last year. As Grant said, the price for pitching is very high. Now, I was shocked. I wasn't shocked they brought Charlie Morton back. I was a little shocked they brought him back for $20 million. I thought that was a little bit high. I would have been more comfortable with even $15 million than $20 million. And you look at, where the Braves payroll is now. But Grant, again, to your point, where you're seeing what starting pitchers are getting right now, back of the rotation starting pitchers, which if Morton doesn't bounce back, that's what he is. That's what he was for at least part of 2022. He had moments and flashes here and there being that top of the rotation arm. But, does that Charlie Morton contract look a little different or, better or worse in your eyes with what we've seen so far this offseason?
It really, I felt like when they did that and announced that signing, more or less, they respectfully, in a lot of ways, just picked up Charlie Morton's option by calling it, re-signing him and extending him and putting another option year on top of that. They wanted to have him back. I mean, Charlie Morton, if you get inside the numbers, I know the Braves believe that he still has the swing and miss capabilities of being a very effective big league starting pitcher. Are his days as a number one, which was really a late bloomer in his career, are those maybe behind him? And is he going to have to, grind a little bit the way he did through 2022? I hope maybe not as hard, but, still, I think there's more value in Charlie Morton at that level than, going out and, I mean, the Tigers gave Matthew Boyd, I believe, $10 million to re-sign with them. And Boyd's been a real enigma for the majority of his career. He can miss some bats. He can also give up a ton of homers. We saw Zach Eflin get $12 or $13 million a year from the Tampa Bay Rays. Eflin kind of got himself back on track as a reliever. They're going to start him, quite obviously, or I would believe they would. They might use him as a closer. Who knows? We'll find out. Doesn't really matter for the point of this postcast. But a lot of money is being thrown at pitchers who are less of the known commodity and of the pedigree of Charlie Morton. So again, I just felt like it was extending or picking up his option and extending him out another option for the following year. And if Charlie wants to come back and with what he offers, I think every fifth day, and also to the overall dynamic of that starting rotation, he's still a useful piece. And there could be some crazy pitching deals that we haven't seen yet this winter that'll make you feel like that the old saying about there's no bad 1 year deal might again be true with Charlie Morton in 2023.
And look, whether you like the move or not, I just think personally, a lot of that deal and a lot of that money is because they really, really respect his veteran leadership in that clubhouse. And that means something. You hear Mike Soroka talk about it, other pitchers talk about it, what he means to them and just those conversations that they have. And again, is that worth, an extra $5 million? I don't know. Maybe. We'll see how the Braves pitching staff is really good. So I certainly think there's something to that, but there's definitely, a part of it that's because they want that veteran leadership that Charlie Morton is. And it would not surprise me at all because of the metrics. Look, he gave up 30 home runs last year.
Yeah.
That was a big part of his issues. If he just cuts that down, I think he's back to being that middle of the top of the rotation arm. So it would not surprise me at all if he bounces back and has a good year in 2023.
Yeah, the home runs were the most surprising and the most troubling stat for Charlie Morton last year. He still surpassed 200 strikeouts. I mean, you'd watch Charlie pitch, and at times it seemed like he'd be in complete control, but they might run into a bad inning. It might come early, then he settles in, or he might be settled in, and then all of a sudden it comes off the rails, and, a couple of long balls. Is very un-Charlie Morton-like to see the amount of home runs this year. You had to go all the way back to his early career with the Pittsburgh Pirates to find Charlie Morton giving up home runs at the rate he did last year. So I think there are corrections that can be made. I still think the stuff is there. The fastball was still alive. That curveball is still ridiculous. He's going to hit a few batters, but if he can keep the ball in the park, I still think this is a very useful pitcher who could put up somewhere in the 3 to maybe 4 or 5 WAR level if he really gets rolling again. And that, of course, is a very useful arm, and nobody needs me to tell him that.
Yeah. Another question here, and this is a topic that I think is very good to talk about because I think it's a real possibility. And Doug says, what about bringing back Duvall for left field as a power bat? I think that's a very real possibility, especially if they get somebody for shortstop, Dansby or otherwise, to get a Duvall, platoon him with Rosario, and just see where things go from there.
I would not hate that at all. And I think Adam Duvall has been nothing but a net positive in his time with the Braves. I mean, who would have thought when he got traded over in 2018 and was really kind of a non-factor and not a very exciting trade acquisition, that this would be a guy that would take an assignment to the minor leagues, go back down there, get his career back on track, have some big moments in 2019, big moments in 2020, get traded back in 2021, have even more. And then, this year it was a wrist injury that took him down and cost him the remainder of the season after he really seemed to be getting back on track in June, if not into early July, whenever it was he got hurt. But for 5 or 6 weeks prior to the wrist injury, he had become one of the Braves' top 4 or 5 hitters as the team was turning the season around. So if that wrist is back and you can get Adam Duvall on something, in the neighborhood of a $5 to $7 million deal to platoon with Eddie Rosario, I would consider left field solved. And then I would move on to DH and figure out, of course, the Marcell Ozuna question that we already talked about. And if you could find somebody else or find some way to maybe get those at bats to William Contreras, because I still think Travis d'Arnaud is going to catch a little bit more than Will Contreras if both guys are healthy this year, because Travis is a primary catcher, and I think he's still kind of the lead catcher as of now. But just the work and the progress that William Contreras made last year, I don't know that we talk about him enough as to what he did. I mean, we see the stats, and clearly he was an all-star, so it's not like I can sit here and tell you that he's going to sneak up on everybody. But man, he kind of gets lost, I think, a little bit in some of the other conversations with the Michael Harrises and Spencer Striders. But great young players who broke out in a big way for the Braves in 2022. William Contreras was pretty high on that list as well. So I'd love to see him find a way to get some more at bats. And it kind of goes back to what we said a little bit earlier. I mean, this is a Braves team that really needs some tweaks and finishing touches. And, you got to address shortstop. But outside of that, this is a very good baseball club. They won 101 games last year, and they should have won more in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I've been saying all offseason, this is already a postseason type of team, just trying to put the finishing touches on it. And yeah, Contreras, what he did last year, just remarkable. And we talked about it all last season, not just what he did at the plate, but I thought what he did behind the plate just grew tremendously. And I think you're right. Travis will get the majority of the starts, but I think Contreras is going to get 2 or 3 games a week at catcher. Yeah. I think it's going to be, a little bit more of a split, and I hope he does get some of those spots at DH. But going back to Duvall, the fact he can play all 3 outfield positions as well. Now, you wouldn't want him out there in center a ton. He handled it last year, and I think that put a lot of, I think it wore him down a lot, because you saw when he moved him to left field, as you talked about, that's when the bat really started to heat back up. But another player that's capable of doing that. And I've been critical of Duvall at times in his tenure with the Braves, but you play him in the right situation. And again, if you can get him on a 6-7 year or a $7 million 1-year deal, I think that's a very good option and viable option for the Braves.
And it's somebody that and you know what to expect. I mean, the Braves, they are a club that really likes the fit. They like the player. They also like the person. We've seen that be a huge part of how they do all of their moves. So it wouldn't be surprising to see Adam Duvall come back. It would be surprising for me to see the Braves get into the mix for, a Mitch Haniger at $15 million a year for 3 or 4 years. If that's the market that he's getting after the injuries that he's gone through the past few years, good on him. I hope he gets that somewhere. I just don't see the Braves spending like that. So you get a bounce back from Eddie Rosario, maybe the return of Adam Duvall. You figure out what you can with DH and know that you have a bat as good as William Contreras to maybe utilize in that spot. There should be some better offense from that group than there was a year ago, once you figure out the $37 million question of where or if Marcell Ozuna fits on your club in 2023 and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's kind of wrap things up here. Appreciate everybody that put the questions in the chat section there. If you didn't get to yours, make sure you put them in the comments on YouTube. But let's turn our attention back to the winter meetings, Grant, and make a couple of predictions real quick. So at the end of these winter meetings, will the Braves have their shortstop?
I'm going to say no. I think it's going to go a little bit longer than that. I think it could be a nice present for the holiday season, but I don't think it's going to happen in the first week of December. I would love to be wrong. I would love to have this thing, no pun intended, all wrapped up with a bow on it before we get into 2023. But it just feels like this market for shortstops has really not begun to move yet. So I'm fascinated to see, how exactly it plays right now with that number of high level free agents out there. Maybe the time to do the legwork on figuring out if anybody's maybe shopping a shortstop is something that Alex Anthopoulos and his crew are working on as well. So there will be plans, contingencies for the Braves to fill this void. I don't think that we've seen the move as of yet. And I still think that the move that makes a ton of sense for this club for what we've come to expect the last 5 or 6 years is to have Dansby Swanson back in the fold and a part of this club, as you've locked up a great nucleus for most of the rest of this decade.
And I think you're right on point. I'm right in agreement with you that, unless and until I see Dansby Swanson sign somewhere else, I think he's coming back to the Braves. But it is very similar, and I think you made another great point here too. It's very similar to the Freddie Freeman situation where Alex was ready to pivot when it looked like things weren't going to work out with Freddie. He was ready. I don't think those conversations just started then. And I think you touched on it going into these winter meetings. Whether Dansby or any other shortstops get signed to these winter meetings, I think those talks need to happen. Who's available out there at the shortstop position so that Alex knows. So if things don't work out with Dansby, he gets a better offer, goes somewhere else, he can immediately pivot to one of those trade scenarios and know what it's going to cost, know who's available. So I think that's a good point. Something we'll most definitely will not hear about, but certainly something that I would be pretty sure is going to happen at the winter meetings is that he's going to touch base and see what shortstops are available out there in the trade market.
Of course. And, we look at, and I see in the comments here, the talks about what would the deal look like. And I've kind of bookmarked, Trevor Story and Javi Baez got 6 and 140 last year. I think that kind of sets the floor for what the shortstop market could look like. If the Braves get in that 6 and 130 range, that'd be about $22 million a year average annual value for Dansby Swanson. that'd pretty much be in line with Austin Riley and Matt Olson and a couple of the larger extensions that they've given out for a little bit more tenured players. Some of the younger guys signed either earlier in the case of Acuna or Albies, or just signed in the case of Michael Harris and Spencer Strider. But Dansby's been around the block for a minute. He is viewed as a guy that has been a leader for this club and somebody that they want to have back if you're just asking the roster at any given time. So if you could get him in that 6 and 130 range, I think that's a deal that could come together and could happen. If it starts to get into the 6 and 150 and beyond, then I think that there could be some other options that the Braves will be looking at that point, because I'm not sure that they feel like Dansby is a $25 or $30 million a year player, even if the projections out there say that he may very well be that, because he timed a career year about as well as you possibly can to go into free agency, and good for him for doing that.
That he did, and it makes me a little uncomfortable to go to that $22 to $25 million a year range that many people are projecting him at. In the majority of his career, he's been a 3-WAR player, still really good, but then he balloons to a 6-WAR player in his free agent season. Raises a little bit of red flags for me, and I want Dansby back. I've been very clear on that. I want him back, but I think you do have to be a little bit cautious of that when looking towards the future and what player is he going to be? Is he going to be that 3-WAR guy he's been for most of his career, or is he going to be that 6-WAR guy? And are you going to pay him as that 6-WAR player? I want to make one more prediction. I don't think Dansby signs this winter meetings. I don't think Braves have a shortstop decision at these winter meetings, but do you think the Braves make any move for a player with an AAV of 10 million or more during these winter meetings?
I kind of hope so, but I don't necessarily expect it, because I don't know exactly who it would be if it's not Dansby Swanson. But if they go out and, sign that DH to a 1-year deal, I feel like that might be sort of at the back end of the offseason, like in later January. So I'll go ahead and say no tentatively, but I would love to be wrong about the Braves spending on a player, because if you're making $10+ million or more, there should be a little bit more intrigue about that name and what role that player would play for the Atlanta Braves. And if he doesn't play shortstop and wear number 7, then I really want to know who it is.
Yeah, I'm right there with you as well. So it sounds like it may be a pretty quiet winter meetings for the Braves as well, unfortunately. But like we said, there's not a ton to do. I mean, right now we're just waiting to see how the shortstop market plays out. Hopefully we see a couple of those top guys go at the winter meetings and kind of move things along. But as Jeff Passan of ESPN has written, and others have written as well, things have been kind of just bubbling on the surface right there. You feel like there's an explosion coming, Grant. I do think we see a lot of moves at the winter meetings. I just don't know how much the Braves are involved in them.
Yeah, I don't know. I can tell you this. One of the most fascinating parts of the winter meetings is, every day you'll go in there, there's a gigantic, ballroom that's basically where all of the writers and media types are all set up. And then there'll be a morning or an afternoon, whatever the case is, but there'll be a time where you walk outside and there are about 85 or 90 people all gathered around one person who's usually up on the steps using it as a makeshift dais to talk to these 90 people. And I don't think you'd be shocked to know that person who's holding court out there is Scott Boras. I always look forward to, we call it the rock concert, when he's out there talking about all of his guys and the way he sees the market and how things are sizing up. So we haven't gotten our Scott Boras rock concert at the winter meetings yet, but that's always something that's, can typically be a harbinger of things to come, because he's holding a lot of the cards for the free agent market this offseason. And if he's able to play a couple of those cards over the course of the winter meetings, maybe we do see things start to heat up and we start to get a little bit of movement and clarity on where some guys could be going and what market is going to come to, start moving a little bit. And I think shortstop is the place we're all focused on.
Yeah, for sure. Shortstop, Aaron Judge, obviously being the big prize of the offseason. I think, even teams that maybe, can go with either a shortstop or outfielder, they're just looking to make a big splash that maybe once the Judge move happens, and maybe they pivot to shortstop. So I think he holds a lot of dominoes as well. But I do hope we see a lot of movement at the winter meetings. I hope things do start to pick up and the hot stove actually starts to heat up. But either way, Grant, thanks so much for joining me on this winter meetings preview. Thank you so much for all that you've done, Locked On Braves and Locked On Braves postcast this year. Definitely looking to have you back on soon as well. Always appreciate your insights. That will do it for this episode of Locked On Braves. Make sure that you follow us at LockedOn_Braves on Twitter. You can follow me at ShortstopBall. Also, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast. And we will talk to you next time.